Support the G5TM channel by subscribing, becoming a YouTube channel member and joining on Patreon. Hi there, the POTA Performer. Have you heard of it? Well, if you've watched a bit of ham radio YouTube in the last year, you certainly have, I would have thought. Is it really the magic bullet, that brilliant antenna that people say it is? Let's see what modelling tells us about this phenomenon that seems to have gripped parks on the air. Well, welcome to the channel. Now, most people who use quarter wave verticals do so in two sort of ways, either elevated or ground mounted. Now, elevated quarter wave verticals, as you say, sort of at least two, and generally most people use two for portable tuned radials that are a quarter wavelength long, as well as the vertical element as well. And that gives us a figure of around minus 6.5 dBi according to ANA modelling, with the feed point about a metre above the ground. And you have the radials sort of tapering slowly down towards the ground level. If we then do the other version of having a ground mounted quarter wave with several radials, don't need to be tuned of course, say we've got about 8 quarter waves worth even of radials on the ground, we get a very similar result. Both omnidirectional, both giving us about minus 6.5 dBi. This is over average ground, okay? Now, the POTA Performer. Well, this is an idea that's come up with by Greg, KJ6ER. I had a good chat with Greg 2 or 3, 4 months ago, towards the start of the year, I think it was now. He's a really nice guy. And he came up with this idea about how to get a little bit more gain, or a little bit more directivity, if you like, with a vertical. And he's also come up with other ideas as well, and his infectious enthusiasm is brilliant to see. So let's look at what a POTA Performer looks like then, and let's investigate through modelling whether it is that particular sort of that magic bullet, if you like, when it comes to operating portable. Well, if we look at this as if we were a bird flying overhead, looking directly down above the vertical element, okay? And if we do that, we can see that we've now got a different radial arrangement for the POTA Performer. Again, it's using two elevated tuned radials, but this time, instead of having them 180 degrees from each other, they're 90 degrees from each other. And the idea is that in between those two 90-degree radials, basically bisecting the middle of them, is the sort of direction of greatest performance for this antenna. And many people have mooted on YouTube that we see around a 4 to 6 dBi improvement over a standard omnidirectional quarter wave, mainly because of this directivity. So let's see then whether or not we have that particular improvement within modelling. So looking then at how these radials are arranged, what we can see is that we have a particular strong current going in between the two of them at 12 and 3 o'clock, at about 1:30 actually, if we look at this particular diagram here. And you can see that that figure is about minus 5.4 dBi. And if we then go directly behind it 180 degrees, we have from the strongest direction, we've got the weakest direction. And the weakest direction tells us about minus 8.2 dBi. Now, if we might cast our minds back to what we saw with both the sort of conventional verticals we looked at earlier, that minus 6.5 dBi sort of figure, then what we're seeing really then here is a figure that is about 1.1 dBi better in its strongest direction for the POTA Performer. And then for its weakest direction, we're looking at about minus 1.7 dBi. Now, if you think about it, the difference between plus 1.1 and minus 1.7, you could argue gives us a front to back of 2.8 dBi. But even though there is that front to back, compared to a conventional vertical, and what we're seeing basically is a performance that is really only about a dB up in the strongest direction and a couple of dB down in the weakest direction. So is it really going to matter that much in the real world? A single dB? Maybe not. And as we can see here, if we compare the pattern we get on modelling between the black one, which is the elevated one for the standard elevated antenna for quarter waves, the red one is the ground mounted one, and the blue one is the POTA Performer. There is very little difference really. There is tiny more directivity with the POTA Performer in terms of how much stronger your signal is going to be and how much stronger you're going to hear other people. I'm not sure there's a massive amount of difference in the real world. Now, some people swear by it. I'm not sure if anyone's done any A/B testing, which would be very interesting. But frankly, this doesn't convince me at this stage that there's a massive difference between a POTA Performer and a standard quarter wave vertical. Now, there's one more antenna we haven't thought of yet, which uses just one radial. And of course, that's the L-shaped vertical or even L-shaped dipole. All right. Now let's see how that compares with the other antennas we've looked at. So like any vertical has elevated radials, or in this case a radial, it still needs to be tuned. So we've got a quarter wave vertical and a quarter wave sort of elevated horizontal radial. Now in real world, that radial will probably need to be slightly shorter than the vertical in order to bring the antenna to resonance, but let's not worry about that for the moment. What this particular situation will give us, however, is some directivity in the direction of that particular radial. So if you're sort of going out early morning trying to work DX, say from the UK to VK Australia, then you can point that particular radial in the direction of where you believe VK to be and have a bit more of a stronger signal then. But how much stronger will it actually be? Well, if we look at this particular diagram here, if we look at, say, that radial is going towards the right at 3 o'clock, then we have a figure of minus 5.2, and behind it, in its weakest spot, minus 8.7. So we are a fractionally stronger, only a fractionally stronger than the POTA Performer. And we've actually got a weaker sort of signal coming from behind, directly behind. So there's more, if there's anything, there's a bit more of a front to back here, about a dB more than the POTA Performer has. That may or may not be critical. To be honest with you, minus 8.7, you're still going to hear strong stations from behind anyway. But the point is that you can operate an L-shaped sort of vertical like this, which will work really, really well. You don't need to have two radials. You don't have to position them in two different ways. You can have one support, one vertical support, and one support for your elevated radial in whatever direction you want it to be. And perhaps that makes things a bit easier in terms of operating a very simple single vertical that could be a little bit more choosing which direction it shoots its signal out. So then, the POTA Performer. Here's my final thoughts. So it does have directionality even compared with conventional omnidirectional verticals. However, the advantage for the POTA Performer over both types of quarter waves is only fractionally over 1 dBi, and only in its strongest direction. Front to back, in inverted commas, is apparent insofar as the direction of maximum signal at the midpoint between the two radials is almost 3 dBi stronger than 180 degrees opposite. However, this means that the strongest direction is barely 1 dBi better than a conventional quarter wave, and the weakest direction is almost 2 dBi weaker than a conventional quarter wave. Maybe there isn't a magic bullet after all. And in fact, if you want a simple directional vertical, a single vertical that's directional, then maybe a single radial L-shaped vertical arguably has the same, or even if we're being picky about it, fractionally stronger real-world performance in the direction you want it to go to as the two radial POTA Performer. May also, of course, having only one radial, be easier to deploy. So there we are, the POTA Performer. I still think it's good. It's injected a lot of enthusiasm into Parks on the Air, gets people out and about. That can't be bad for the hobby. Is it a magic bullet? I would argue not. However, if psychologically it makes you feel better about going out there and giving it a go and getting on the air, what's wrong with that? Just don't expect a Yagi type performance from it, okay? And maybe if you want to make life simpler for yourself and you want a bit of directionality, first thing in the morning to VK or in the afternoon or even towards the US, then just put out a single elevated tuned radial in that direction. Maybe that would be easier than anything else. Who knows? All the best now and take care. Bye-bye.